peace and joy have nothing to do with how we feel, right? Like they are states of being rather than emotional responses.
Welcome to the Miracle Hill podcast, where we share raw stories and have honest conversations that display the anatomy of God's grace here at Miracle Hill Ministries. We hope that these conversations uplift, encourage, inspire, and deepen your walk of faith, and expand your compassion for the last, the least, and the lost. And now, your host, Ryan Duerk.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to the Miracle Hill podcast. I'm your host, Ryan. We are excited that you're here. We're starting a new season, and we're doing something a little bit different this season. If you didn't know, I wrote a book, and it got published some time ago, Counterfeit Peace. You can check it out on Amazon. But this season, we're going to do a little bit shorter episodes, and we're going to be interviewing people that are either kind of characters within the manuscript or are maybe subject matter experts about things that we're talking about in the book. Our very own digital storyteller, Michael Livingston, is going to join us. He's going to kind of facilitate these conversations a little bit, but we are excited that you're here. We are glad that you're a part of this podcast. We certainly want you to tell us what you think. You can email us at podcast@miraclehill.org. So buckle up and let's jump in.
Ryan, tell us a little bit about yourself, your history. What does the soil of your life look like? And what I mean by that is, where did your roots grow up in? What has shaped you over the years of your life? How has the external factors of your world influenced who you are today?
It is a fascinating way to frame that question. So, the easy answer is that I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ and a husband to Lauren and a father to two amazing kids. But how does the growth of life result in that? I think it's kind of like, using your question, what does the soul of your life look like? It's kind of like growing plants on Mars. Like the plant should not exist there because of the poor quality of the soil for a really, really, really long time. But then you insert God's grace into that soil. It's like churning it with good nutrients and creating a substrate that can support life, not only support life, but, the Lord has blessed me with an amazing life. Certainly not one that I deserve. I did not water it well. I didn't tend the soil well.
Right.
But God.
Yeah. God really is the one who tends the soil. It's interesting how we all have varied upbringings or varied factors that create who we are today. But what I find beautiful, especially about that question, is just the idea that in the end, God is the one who sort of tends the soil to make the grace abound. And I thought that was just a beautiful way to start this conversation. Because,
and right in the beginning, thorns and thistles you'll have when you tend the soil.
Absolutely.
Right. But what can the Lord do with a garden if he so chooses?
Yeah.
Something beautiful.
Yeah. I think that's, it just, the more I think about that myself and just my own course of existence, how vanity is usually what pursues when I try to tend my own soil. But when God is the one sort of breaking up those roots and watering the garden, what beautiful things can grow from it.
For sure.
Which I think personally ties into the book that you recently wrote and published, which is called Counterfeit Peace.
Mm-hmm.
What's the story behind the name of the book, and why did you feel the need to write a book at all for that?
Yeah, so the name, I toyed with a handful of names, but there's this theme that kind of runs through the narrative. And basically, I'm gonna summarize the entire book for people. Ryan is no good, God is good. So Ryan's going to try to let God be in control, right? Which is really the first 3 steps of the 12 steps of good recovery. But I think that we as humans, we are constantly on the hunt for a couple of things. I think we're constantly on the hunt for peace. And I think we're constantly on the hunt for joy, although I don't think that we always articulate it in that way. We're looking for meaning in a variety of different ways. We're looking for things that give us meaning or help us to feel like we have purpose. But what we're really after is peace in the midst of our life, right? You know, using the idea of thorns and thistles, right? Life is filled with thorns and thistles. And so how do you be content in the midst of that? And I personally, and I think what is common for people is I chased all these avenues to provide peace that were all not real. They were counterfeit. They were never going to result in true peace. And so, you know, the unsaid title is, here's all the counterfeit peace, but what then is true peace?
Mm. So it's a quest for true peace.
It's a quest for true
defined
peace.
by counterfeits, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is such an interesting term. How do you, in as simple of a way as possible, how do you define the term counterfeit peace?
Yeah. So you and I recorded a video many moons ago now about this idea. So we didn't get to go into depth. So let's go into just a little bit of depth. So if you work for the Treasury of the United States and you are someone who identifies counterfeit bills, they do not train you by having you look at counterfeit bills. They train you by having you look at the real bill,
right,
and becoming an expert on what the real, Federal Reserve note is. Thereby, anything that is not that true Federal Reserve note by default is a counterfeit, is a false effect of life. It's not going to result in true peace. So that's what I would say. I would say counterfeit peace is anything other than true peace. And true peace, taking the punchline away from the book, true peace comes only from relationship with the Lord.
Yeah. And that's not something that, it's not something that we just easily attain to, right? It's something that requires a degree of, we're giving up ourselves and we're slowly struggling to attain this true peace.
Yeah. And arguably we never attain it.
Right.
Fully.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's the process of sanctification is, sanctification, the process of being made holy. You could say Ryan's translation, sanctification, the process of attaining true and lasting peace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That almost could be the tagline of the book, I think. How do you, and I don't want to jump too far into this because we're going to explore this topic a little more as the season expounds, but how do you think a life of addiction relates to the idea of counterfeit peace?
Yeah, so we're going to explore kind of what addiction is and all those types of things, but at a very simple level, addiction is idolatry. It is placing something as more important than God, and even for the person who is the non-believer, addiction is placing an importance on something to give you something. So what is the exchange? What is addiction trying to result in? And I think for most addicts, they are trying to find momentary peace. They're trying to find a quiet spot in the storm of life. So I think addiction by definition is counterfeit peace.
Yeah.
Right. Like it is attempting to find peace through a means that will not provide it.
Yeah. You said something really interesting just a moment ago about idolatry and addiction being idolatry. I don't know that someone who's living in the throes of addiction would necessarily see it that way. I think they would realize that something has gotten a hold of them. Mm-hmm. How do you get to the point where you see it as an idol as opposed to just this thing that I'm consumed by?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I would have said that in early recovery even. Like, I don't know that I would have taken it to that extreme to say that it was idolatry. I I think the hard answer is time and distance away from it
Mm.
helps you to identify what it truly is. Um, a lot of times when we talk about addiction, we accidentally anthropomorphize the drug or the alcohol, right? Like we give it some kind of power, some kind of human power that it is causing something, but it is an inanimate object, right? Whether it's meth or crack or heroin or alcohol or whatever, it's just an object. It has no ability to make you do anything. So then, is the idolatry of addiction idolatry of an object? Perhaps. Or is it idolatry of self,
Mm.
right? Like where all we care about is ourselves.
Yeah.
There's that old Christian acronym for joy, which stands for Jesus, others, yourself. Like the Christian economy is one where we are the least important person in the equation.
Right.
Jesus is number one, loving others is number two, and caring for self is number three. But in addiction, it is just why. Like there's no acronym, right?
Yeah.
It's yourself. You
Yeah.
are self-focused, like a starving man.
Mm.
That all they can think about is what they can do to provide for themselves.
Mm. I think that's why this book reaches beyond just addiction, in the sense that like your acronym joy, right? It ends with yourself, but in our culture today, yourself is the primary thing that we put the most stock and agency in. And so even though this is an autobiographical account of your life, your history, your childhood, your struggles with addiction, overcoming and then getting to where you are today, I still think it relates beyond those borders. What did the writing process for this book look like? Like, how did you find time to write it? Where did you write it? When did you start penning all these things? How did you know that you had a book sitting on the table that you needed to put together? What was that process look like?
Yeah, so there was a couple stories that I had written before. I had written them as part of a counseling process, and I had enjoyed. That's not the right word. I had found it healing to write those stories. Enjoy was not part of it. And so how did I find the time? I found it very sparingly over the course of about 2 years, and it started out as more maybe journaling than writing a book. Writing down some thoughts, writing down some stories, but maybe with a lesson that goes with it. I am not as consistent with my journaling as I have been in years past, but there have been seasons in my life when I've journaled every single day. And so this was more like a large dump journaling. And several months into that, I think that sparked the idea that maybe it was something more than that. And so I'm a very organized person. So I was like, okay, well, if it is something more than that, let me pull up an Excel spreadsheet and write down what the story would be like. What are the main chapters,
Right.
if you will. And then I just started tackling it bit by bit. I didn't really tell anybody about it for a really, really long time till I got north of, I don't know, 30, 40,000 words. And then I shared it with a couple people. I was like, I think I might be doing something here. But I would go.
Who was the first person
I'm sure my wife.
Yeah, that seems right. Yeah.
And then maybe some people close to me. I don't recall at this point in the game. So over the course of 2 years, I probably wrote for 40, 60, 80 hours, something like that. Not a lot. But I would write for 3 days and then I wouldn't have time or the mental bandwidth to do it for a month. And then I'd write for a day and just kind of piecemealed it.
It's interesting. Obviously, like when you're writing a book, you're bringing other people into the crevices of your soul, right? And especially something like this, where it's basically stemmed from your journaling entries. What is that like, sharing your experiences and then also your thoughts from those experiences with other people?
Yeah, so if my wife was sitting here, she would tell you that I am brutally transparent, but not often vulnerable. So what does she mean by that? She means that I am more open than most people to talk about things from my life that other people might shy away from, but that I am more closed off to talk about things where I feel like it can be used against me, or I feel like I'm opening myself up to be judged or harmed, or where I feel exposed. Maybe that's the right word.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good word. Yeah.
So this book is certainly transparent, but there's a lot of real vulnerability in there about how I have thought, how I do think, which frankly is a little terrifying. But, at some point in the writing journey, I'm not going to say that it was like a supernatural thing, but I certainly felt like the Lord was in it and he was guiding me along this. And I just kind of got over myself, right? Like it's not about me, even though the book's about me. If anybody walks away from that book thinking that that book is about me, they have not read that book.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like it. And so I don't know. I got really comfortable with it. Now, that being said, the day that the book dropped was terrifying and exciting all at the same time.
Yeah. I imagine that feeling of like this thing is in the wild, I know
and
how that
can't
feels.
Stop it. It's
right.
out.
I know how that feels from creating, video projects or something where it's like
Yeah.
it's done, it's out in the world, and now everyone has seen it. It's a completely different story when it's a book and it's as vulnerable as this one is.
I think it is different, but I think that the emotion there is the exact same. Like you've created a video, and now it's out there for others to lay judgment on, right? Like, am I any good? Did like the story in the book is one thing, but man, I was concerned if people would appreciate the writing, right? Like I'm not a professional author.
Yeah. How's my prose? Those kind of things. Yeah. That makes sense.
So same thing with a video, right? Yeah. Like, oh, it's out there.
Right. And now it's under the scrutiny of others.
Yes.
To either be loved and enjoyed or reviled and mocked. And it is such a vulnerable thing. But again, the nuance of it also being God's story working through you, that adds a completely different dynamic to it. What's the most important lesson you've learned while writing your own journey?
What is the most important thing that I've learned? Oh man, I don't know that I prepared for this question. I think that prior to the book, I know anecdotally, or I could articulate to you that our story is not our own, right? Like it is God's story. But yeah, I guess putting this book out there kind of cemented that thought.
Yeah.
Here's me being transparent and vulnerable. I have wants in life. You have wants in life. We all do. But if we are truly going to chase Jesus, those can't matter, or we have to fight against them mattering. And so if I feel like the Lord has called me into service for him, which I do, then I have to do what he tells me to do, whether it's comfortable or not. And sometimes, man, it is in the spots where we are uncomfortable that we grow the most.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That's the first thing that jumped into my mind.
That's a good way of thinking about it. How would you determine the difference between a want or like a desire in life and then what is like a holy pursuit or a calling?
Yeah.
I think that's to me that sometimes a want or a desire can feel like a good a good thing, but maybe it isn't. So how do you, and that might go back to the theme of counterfeit peace. Where do you
Yeah,
where do you
no,
discern the
I've
difference
got
there?
whole chapters on this subject in the
Yeah,
book.
exactly.
So I have a very pragmatic view of our walk, and I feel like the Lord helps direct the difference between a want and a need, or a want and a God-directed action. For me personally, I find that there is a tremendous amount of safety in an abundance of counselors. And that's not just older, wiser individuals, but like at Miracle Hill, like we don't make major decisions in a vacuum,
Right.
right? Like we try to utilize everybody's connection or walk with the Lord to discern what is the right path. And I think that that is true. I think that Scripture and the title of this book help us in that regard. I feel like the Lord talks to us and helps confirm things through His Word. But I also think that He gives us peace in decisions that He's in the midst of. But if we are having to force peace, that doesn't mean it's going to be comfortable. And that's an important clarification. Peace and joy have nothing to do with how we feel.
Right.
Right? Like they are states of being rather than emotional responses.
Right.
And so, man, others, His Word, experiencing peace in the decisions.
Yeah. It's very easy to conflate peace and comfort with each other. And that's not necessarily the truth, or at least from what we should be able to pull from Scripture. Peace is a vastly different feeling.
Yeah, I mean, Christ, for the joy set before Him, endured the cross.
Yeah.
For the joy set before Him, which has nothing to do with the moment on the cross.
Right.
Right? It has to do with the action resulting from the cross.
Right.
And peace in the same way, right? Peace is about the Lord's economy rather than our current state of being.
Yeah. That's beautiful. It's truly beautiful. In this book, was there a particular chapter or a particular story that was your favorite to write down?
Yeah, I think there's two.
Okay.
Towards the end of the book, there's a chapter called Benji and Evelyn, about a random interaction with a couple on a camping trip with my son that I really appreciated. I think that one of the traits of Jesus that I appreciate more than others is the fancy term that we use is that He was an iconoclast.
Yeah.
In that He breaks stereotypes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the chapter on Benji and Evelyn shatters the stereotype of modern Christianity, and I really like that chapter.
Could you just maybe succinctly just sort of do an overview of what that chapter was about for someone who's listening and maybe hasn't read
the
it?
The overview, without stealing the story, is me and my son get into trouble. These random strangers come to our rescue. The random strangers look like they don't look like they go to church. They look countercultural, and then they proceed to try to win us for Jesus. Like they served us, they loved us, like we're commanded to do. And then they proceeded to tell us why they loved us. And so then I found out they're my brother and sister in Christ, right? And we have this great dialogue. But they break every stereotype in a good way and a bad way. They break the stereotype of what a person who goes to church looks like. Then they break the stereotype. And this is the sad part about what a person that goes to church does, in that these people stopped and helped the Samaritan at the side of the road.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Because at the time, I didn't look like I go to church. Right? Like I'm sweaty, covered in dirt, with a long beard, covered in tattoos, with a little boy on the side of the road, and they stopped and helped anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really I mean, I think to me, that's what stands out about Miracle Hill in general. I don't know how many times I've been to a shelter and I've sat down with someone with the intention of maybe being Jesus to them, and in return they've been
Yeah.
Jesus back to me, and then I walk away going, okay, that completely broke the stereotype of what I was anticipating. And so to have that experience yourself, and for anyone who's listening, this is later on in the book, so it's
Yeah.
like it's after you've got several other
Yeah.
stories behind you. This one comes along and it kind of catches you off guard, and it's a beautiful depiction of Christ living and being present in this world in unexpected places. So
I think the other story that, and I think that this answer changes depending on what week you ask me.
Okay.
But I think one of the last stories I tell, matter of fact, I think it's the second to last chapter in the book, is about a scenario that happened recently within the past year and a half, where very quickly I started to believe lies that the enemy was saying about who I am and whose I am. And I don't know, I feel like it's a reminder to all of us that walk with Jesus that it's like driving a car uphill. You've got to keep pushing forward, because if you stop, you'll coast back down, and you can't do that. So maybe it's a warning to myself, and to others that, hey, we gotta keep chasing, running the race.
Yeah, it doesn't there's certain aspects of the walk that get easier,
Sure,
but then there's certain ones that I think become more apparent that we need to tend to in ways that maybe we haven't in the past. It's like when Jesus talks about removing the demon from a house, and then it's empty and vacant, and there's 7 more that can return. I think that's kind of the walk of the Christian, is like you get rid of this one hill, and then suddenly, as you're continuing in your walk, you see that there's other things that keep popping up, and if you're not tending to it, they can catch you off guard very quickly. What was the hardest portion of this book to write, and why?
Yeah. So the first couple chapters of the book are emotionally very challenging. I think for the reader and for the writer, and I've had lots of counseling about those chapters.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that this was a healing exercise, but to write those chapters, I really had to step back into the shoes of a very hurt and confused man that I once was.
Yeah.
And so that's a challenging thing to do.
Yeah. Did you start writing those in recovery, or did you write those like later on, like in retrospect?
Yeah. So the very first 2 chapters are 2 of the chapters that I had written previously for other purposes.
Okay.
And then had to rewrite them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and rewrite them for someone to read it rather than write them for counseling purposes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Those are different exercises.
So rehashing that, was that, I imagine that was probably difficult.
For sure.
And we're talking about more specifically like your childhood and early, like,
well, addiction and childhood and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that an exercise that is good to do? Like if someone is distanced from an addictive past, is it good for them to rehash something like that? Like, would you advise them to do that?
There's a yes or a no answer to that. I think it depends on the person. It depends on their wise counsel and who they are and what purpose that would serve.
I think one of the start portions of the book that I recall, and you and I in a prior conversation talked about it, was your poem that you wrote. You wrote poetry in it, which that's a beautiful addition to the book. It's not just all prose; there's poetry as well too. What did that stem from? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I don't know that we've talked.
I don't know. I don't think so. No.
Okay, so when I finished Overcomers in 2003, and then again in 2007. You're trying to figure out where you're going in this world, and you're also trying to figure out who you are and who you are in a variety of different ways, including socially. And, both those times I was essentially living downtown. I'm living in the rescue mission or in an apartment connected to the rescue mission. And so in my downtime, of which I would have some, I would go downtown and I would sit in front of coffee shops, and frankly, I would people watch, and I would daydream about what life's going to be like, right? Like,
Yeah.
who are these people? What's their story, and how will I relate to them, or will I not relate to them?
Right.
So pause on that. So in seventh grade, a very confused young man was in a English class in seventh grade, and we were supposed to write a poem for the year. I don't remember but it was like a main assignment, and I didn't do it.
Oh no.
And the day that it was due, I don't know if it was before school or in between classes, I scribbled out a poem about hate.
Okay.
And frankly, it was aimed at the fact that I had to do this assignment. Okay. And so I turned the assignment in, and we go home for the weekend, and the next week we come back, and my poem has been laminated, and it's on a bulletin board and has won some kind of like I was told I was the best poem in the class.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
I wish I had that.
And
poem.
it was on hate on the.
It was on hate. And I don't know, something clicked in my brain. It was one of those moments in your youth where I was like, okay, here's something I may be good at that I didn't know I was good at. And so fast forward back in the story. So, with an affinity to journaling and writing, I like to write. Never written a book before, but I do appreciate the art of writing, and I'm a big reader. And so I would sit at these coffee shops and I would write poems. I have dozens of notebooks filled with poems. Then as I kind of evolved who I was between 2003, before I came back to Overcomers, for a season, I tried performance poetry.
Okay.
Like at the coffee shops.
Yeah.
Where you're presenting your poetry.
Yeah.
Again, trying to it's like putting on identity. Like, is this who I am?
Yeah.
Am I a beatnik at a coffee shop?
Ryan the artist.
Yeah. Anyways, that's always been a outlet for me over the years. I feel like I can express myself in a way through poetry that I can't. I'm not saying they're any good, but I'm saying that is something that I have valued.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Yeah, I think, there's a cathartic aspect of just putting out your thoughts on paper. It's another when they have sort of a form and it's a sort of poetic nature to it. And you
don't know this, Michael, but when you've been to my house, there are paintings in my house that I've painted.
Have you? Okay. All right. Yeah.
Like there is like this artistic,
it's there.
It's there somewhere that doesn't get pulled out often.
Maybe that's your next project, right? Is to create some sort of art piece that the world needs to see.
Yeah, they're all abstract kind of deals, but
abstract is beautiful as well too. That's great, Ryan. So in this season, we're going to be taking your book as a sort of a core look at a life of addiction and what it will go through and what the search for true peace is like amidst counterfeit pieces. So in this season, and then also from people who read the book, what do you hope our readers / listeners will walk away with from the experience that they're getting?
Yeah. So one of the questions that I've been asked a dozen times through this whole process of getting this book out there is, who do you think your audience is? And based on who you think your audience is, what do you hope that they get from the book? Because that really changes how you edit the book, right?
Yeah.
So that was very hard for me to answer, because I feel like there are a variety of different audiences. So for people who are still struggling in addiction, I hope that they would find hope in the story. I also hope that they would find that they are not terminally unique.
Mm.
They're not alone.
Yeah.
They're not the only person that thinks that way or does those things. There are other people out there that can be the abundance of counselors, that can come alongside them. I think another audience is people who are related to people, whether through friendship or blood, who struggle with addiction. And I hope that they would walk away with a much better understanding of what's going through somebody's head that's stuck in addiction. Maybe I'll use that word again, that they would experience some iconoclast narratives, that it would change their stereotypes of who people are and why they do what they do. But then to your point, my biggest hope is that this is not a book just for somebody struggling with addiction, but it's for somebody who's struggling with God, or somebody who has been walking with God for a really, really long time, that they would read a different account and maybe walk away with a different view of humanity, or what, the Lord might be personally calling them to do with their life.
That's beautiful. Do you have any final thoughts on this episode?
No, I think this will be the most boring of all the episodes. So
I doubt that.
I hope our listeners stay tuned and check out some of the discussions with some other people coming up.
Yeah, that is true. We have some very good conversations coming up, and I look forward to sharing them with everyone. And we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Thanks for joining us on the Miracle Hill podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share on your platform of choice. You can also visit us on our website, miraclehill.org, to find out more about us and how you can support us in our mission. We can't wait for you to join us again next time.